Hello! Today in the video, we will talk about the discovery of America. The history of the discovery of America begins in the 15th century. Before Europe found out about the existence of America, millions of people already lived on the other side of the world. Their world was vast, complex, and ancient. Cities of stone and clay rose on this continent. Roads were laid through jungles and mountains. Temples were built where priests watched the stars and the movement of the planets. People grew corn, cocoa, and potatoes, created complex farming systems, built water channels and terraces on mountain slopes. They traded for thousands of kilometers, passed on knowledge from generation to generation, and created societies with their own laws, rulers, and religion. But one mistake, the mistake of one person, eventually changed the fate of this world. This story begins long before the day when Europeans first saw the shores of the New World. On October 12, 1492, three small ships approached the island in the warm waters of the Caribbean Sea. The people on board were exhausted from the long journey. They spent more than 2 months in the ocean, not knowing if they would find land or disappear into the endless water. Many have already lost hope. But that morning, a scream broke the silence. Earth! At first, several sailors heard him. Then the screams began to be repeated by others. People ran out onto the deck, peering at the horizon. And indeed, a dark line loomed in the morning fog. Coast! The sailors shouted with joy. Some fell to their knees and prayed. After weeks of fear and doubt, Earth finally appeared before them. They were sure that they had reached the outskirts of Asia. Their captain was sure of it too. But in fact, he stood on the shores of a world that Europe knew almost nothing about. This man's name is Christopher Columbus. The irony of the story is that Columbus never sought America. He was convinced that he was going to India. But to understand why he made this mistake, you need to go back several decades. The middle of the 15th century was a time of great change for Europe. Trade with the countries of the East brought great wealth. Spices, silk, porcelain, precious stones, and rare goods that cost a fortune in Europe were imported from Asia. Pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, all this was more expensive than gold. But in 1453, an event occurred that changed the course of world trade. The Ottoman army captured the ancient city of Constantinople. It was the end of the Byzantine Empire. The city, which for centuries connected Europe and Asia, found itself under the rule of a new power. Many trade routes were blocked or became too expensive. European states began to look for alternative routes to India. Portuguese sailors tried to circumnavigate Africa. One after another, the expeditions moved further south along the western coast of the continent. But there was another option: go west. It was at this time, around 1451, that a boy named Christopher Columbus was born in the Italian city of Genoa. His family was not rich. His father worked as a weaver and wool merchant. But young Columbus began dreaming about the sea early on. As a teenager, he had already sailed on merchant ships. Over time, he became an experienced sailor and navigator. He traveled around the Mediterranean, visited the coast of Africa, and visited ports in Portugal. But he was most interested in the maps. Columbus spent hours studying old nautical charts and books by ancient scientists. He was especially inspired by the works of ancient geographers. He knew that the earth was shaped like a ball. By the 15th century, the educated people of Europe already understood this. But no one knew exactly how big the planet was. And here Columbus made his main mistake. He seriously underestimated the size of the Earth. According to his calculations, if you sail west across the Atlantic Ocean, you can reach Asia relatively quickly. He imagined the ocean to be much smaller than it actually was. In fact, there was a huge ocean between Europe and Asia, and in the middle of it are two huge continents. But Columbus didn't know that. He was sure that his idea was brilliant. In 1484, he proposed his project to the King of Portugal. He asked for ships and funding for an expedition across the Atlantic. The royal advisor studied his calculations, and they came to the conclusion that they were wrong. In their opinion, the expedition could simply disappear into the ocean. Columbus was refused. But he didn't give up. He spent the following years traveling to European courts. He tried to convince the rulers to finance his expedition. Most of them answered the same way. It's too risky. It's crazy. Many sailors of that time were afraid of the Atlantic Ocean. They knew that storms there could be devastating. Some believed in legends about sea monsters and endless waters. But Columbus continued to convince. Finally, he turned to the Spanish monarchs, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. At that time, Spain was experiencing an important moment in its history. On January 2, 1492, the city of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula, fell. The centuries-old war known as the Reconquista has ended. Spain has become a united and powerful kingdom. And now its rulers were looking for new opportunities to trade and expand their influence. On April 17, 1492, the treaty known as the Surrender of Santa Fe was signed. According to this agreement, Columbus received the title of admiral and the promise of great rewards if the expedition proved successful. Now everything was ready. All that remained was to go into the unknown. On August 3, 1492, 3 ships sailed from the Spanish port of Palos. Santa Maria, a pint, Niña. There were about 90 people on board. They didn't know what lay ahead. At first, the journey was peaceful. The ships reached the Canary Islands, where they stopped for repairs. On September 6, 1492, the expedition went out into the ocean again. Now there was only water ahead. The days turned into weeks. The horizon remained empty. Sometimes the sailors noticed strange signs, tree branches floating on the water, or flocks of birds flying west. This gave hope that there was land somewhere ahead. But she still didn't show up. By the end of September, the tension on the ships began to grow. People were getting scared. The ocean seemed endless. Some sailors said that the captain was leading them to the wrong place. In early October 1492, a mutiny almost broke out on the ships. The sailors demanded to turn back. Columbus realized that he had very little time left. He asked them to wait a few more days. It was a crucial moment. If Earth had not appeared, the expedition could have ended here. But fate decreed otherwise. On the night of October 11, 1492, one of the sailors noticed a strange light on the horizon. And in the early morning of October 12, 1492, sailor Rodrigo de Triana shouted the words that changed history. Earth! In front of them was the island of the Bahamian archipelago. Columbus landed on the shore and raised the flag of Spain. He was sure that he had reached Asia, but in fact, he opened the way to a new world. A world that has existed for thousands of years. Scientists believe that the first humans appeared in America about 15 to 20,000 years ago. They came from Asia via an ancient land bridge in the Bering Strait area. Over time, great civilizations arose here. Between 250 and 900, the Maya civilization flourished. In 1325, the Aztecs founded the city of Tenochtitlan. In South America, the Incas built a huge empire in the 15th century. America was a world of cities, roads, and cultures. But after 1492, everything began to change. Columbus made several more voyages. The second expedition began on September 25, 1493. Now the Europeans began to build colonies. With them came diseases, smallpox, measles, flu. Epidemics killed millions of people. Later, military conquests began. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés traveled to Mexico. In 1521, Tenochtitlan fell. In 1532, the Spaniards captured the Inca ruler Atahualpa. In a few decades, huge civilizations have disappeared. It all started on the morning of October 12, 1492. Columbus died on May 20, 1506, without ever knowing that he had discovered a new continent. Later, in 1507, cartographers named these lands America, in honor of the traveler Amerigo Vespucci, who realized that this was a new world. So a miscalculation changed the history of the planet. And it all started with 3 ships that set sail on the morning of August 3, 1492. They went to look for India, but we found a new world.